A morning in Meadowville. The town of Meadowville lay nestled between rolling hills and tranquil rivers, a postcard-perfect image of small-town America. Here, life moves slowly, with residents exchanging friendly greetings at the corner cafe. And the biggest excitement each week was the Saturday farmers market. But beneath Meadowville's peaceful exterior, there were simmering tensions, ones that rarely rose to the surface, but had been felt in subtle ways by certain members of the community for generations. Mary Walker, the town's mayor, had lived her entire life in Meadowville. Growing up as one of the few black families in the area, Mary had always sensed these undercurrents, experiencing a quiet but persistent pressure to prove herself. Through her hard work and commitment to justice, Mary had risen to a place of leadership, dedicating her career to making Meadowville a more inclusive, fair place. But today, as she laced up her sneakers for her morning jog, she had no idea that this day would bring those tensions crashing into the open in a way that would change her life and the town forever. Mary loved her early morning runs. They gave her a rare moment of solitude, a chance to clear her mind before the day's meetings and to brainstorm ideas for improving the town she loved. This morning, she was mentally preparing for an important meeting with several business owners about revitalizing the town square. She jogged through the quiet streets, already forming a plan to make the heart of Meadowville more welcoming to everyone, especially the underrepresented communities she had worked so hard to uplift. As she reached a quiet intersection on her route, Mary noted that the streak was clear. The light ahead was green, and with her usual attention to traffic rules, she crossed the street. But just as she reached the other side, the piercing sound of a police siren shattered the calm. Mary stopped, glancing around, wondering who could be in trouble so early in the morning. "Hey, you there. Stop," a voice called out sharply. Mary turned, surprised to see a police cruiser pulling up behind her, its lights flashing. A white police officer stepped out, his posture stiff and imposing. His hand rested on the butt of his holstered weapon, his expression a mix of irritation and scrutiny. Mary felt a ripple of unease, but kept her face composed as she removed her earbuds. "Good morning, officer," Mary greeted, maintaining a polite tone. "Is there a problem?" The officer, his badge reading Officer Kirkland, gave her a curt look, his eyes flicking up and down as if assessing her. "You crossed against the light back there. I need to see some identification," he said, his tone sharp and accusatory. Taken aback, Mary frowned slightly, trying to recall if she had missed the light. She was meticulous about following traffic laws, especially during her runs. "I'm fairly certain the light was green," she replied calmly, hoping to diffuse the situation. "But if there's been a mistake, I can clarify it." "I don't care about what you think," Officer Kirkland interrupted, his voice growing colder. "I said I need to see some ID. Now." Mary felt a knot form in her stomach. The officer's tone was not only harsh but laced with something else, an authority that felt misplaced for a simple question about crossing the street. She had encountered subtle racism before, in glances, offhand comments, or even polite refusals to work together. But this felt different. It was invasive, like he was looking for an excuse to assert control. "Officer, I am Mary Walker, the mayor of Meadowville," she said, hoping her position might make him reconsider his approach. "If you check your records, you'll see I haven't committed any crime. I'm just out for my morning jog." But instead of recognition, her words seemed to spark something more intense in Kirkland. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, a smirk twisting his lips. "Mayor, huh?" he sneered, his tone thick with skepticism. "I don't care who you think you are. You're not above the law. Show me your ID, or I'll take you in for resisting an officer." Mary's pulse quickened as she scanned the growing crowd that had gathered. Drawn by the flashing lights and the officer's raised voice, she saw familiar faces, her neighbors and constituents, some looking on in shock, others with worry in their eyes. A few pulled out their phones, recording the encounter. She could hear the murmur of disbelief rippling through the group as they recognized her. They knew her as the dedicated woman who had worked tirelessly for their community, the one who had brought businesses to Meadowville and improved infrastructure. To see her standing there, confronted and belittled by a man who should have known her, was a scene that felt surreal. Mary took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person of color who had ever been wrongfully accused or mistreated. She wouldn't let herself be intimidated. With a calm yet firm voice, she spoke up, keeping her head held high. "Officer, I assure you, I'm not resisting. But I also won't allow you to treat me, or anyone else, this way because of your bias. I am the elected mayor of this town. I work with law enforcement every day to uphold the integrity of this community." Kirkland's face hardened, his smirk disappearing, replaced by a look of pure contempt. He wasn't interested in her credentials, in her decades of service, or the respect she commanded from the people around them. To him, she was simply a black woman defying his authority. "I am the law here," he shot back, his voice low and menacing, as he reached for his handcuffs. "And right now, you're under arrest." The crowd gasped, and Mary felt a surge of anger rise within her as the cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. The humiliation and injustice burned in her chest as she looked around, seeing the shock and sadness on the faces of her fellow residents. People called out in her defense, some shouting at the officer, others demanding he stop. But Kirkland's face remained impassive, his grip on her arm tightening as he began to lead her toward the police car. "Excuse me, officer," a voice shouted from the back of the crowd. "You can't arrest her. She's the mayor." But Kirkland ignored the protests, his focus solely on Mary. To him, her position didn't matter. Her authority, her respect in the community, her years of service, they were all irrelevant. All he saw was a black woman daring to stand up to him, and that alone was enough for him to throw his weight around. Mary steadied herself, refusing to show fear. This wasn't just about her dignity. It was about every black man, woman, and child who had ever been treated unfairly in her town, about every person who had felt the sting of prejudice and been too afraid to speak up. She lifted her chin, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Officer, you're making a serious mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through her veins. "When the truth comes out, and it will, you'll be the one held accountable." Kirkland's eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty as he glanced at the crowd, now larger and more vocal, the air filled with shouts and the clicks of recording phones. He was losing control of the situation, yet he gripped her arm tighter, his pride blinding him to the implications of his actions. From the back of the crowd, a familiar figure pushed through. Officer Daniels, a fellow policeman with a reputation for fairness and respect toward all community members. As he approached, his expression was one of disbelief and growing anger. "Kirkland," Daniels said, his voice low but commanding. "What do you think you're doing?" Kirkland tightened his jaw, his grip on Mary's arm never loosening. "I'm doing my job, Daniels. She broke the law, and now she's resisting arrest." Daniels looked between Mary, the crowd, and Kirkland, his eyes narrowing as he took in the situation. "She's the mayor of Meadowville, Kirkland. Let her go before this gets out of hand." But Kirkland wouldn't back down. Instead, he seemed to double down, his face flushed with anger and humiliation as he barked at the crowd. "You all need to disperse. This is police business." Daniels took a step closer, his tone unyielding. "Think about what you're doing, Kirkland. You're arresting the mayor of this town, the person who signs your checks. And for what? An imaginary offense." Kirkland's gaze shifted, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face. But instead of releasing Mary, he pushed her toward Daniels with a frustrated snarl. "Fine. Take her, but don't think this is over." As Daniels unlocked the cuffs, Mary straightened, rubbing her sore wrists, the crowd erupting in applause and cheers of support. Kirkland stormed back to his squad car, defeated but fuming, while Mary looked around at the people who had witnessed the moment, their voices rising together in solidarity. In that instant, Mary knew that this wasn't just about her. This was about the town she had served, about the cracks in the system she had always known were there but now saw more clearly than ever. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Meadowville had been a quiet town for too long, and today, that silence had finally been broken. The shockwaves begin. The events of Mary's arrest spread through Meadowville like wildfire. By noon, the town was abuzz, the story dominating conversations at cafes, in grocery store aisles, and on social media. Videos of the incident, captured by bystanders, had been shared hundreds of times, garnering both outrage and support. Most of the town knew Mary Walker as the hardworking mayor who cared deeply for her community, but others had never looked beyond the color of her skin or her progressive policies. To those people, her arrest was, at best, inconsequential and, at worst, justified. Mary, meanwhile, sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork that felt inconsequential in light of the morning's events. She could still feel the cold bite of the handcuffs on her wrists, and her skin prickled with the memory of Officer Kirkland's sneering face, his blatant disregard for her position, her dignity, and, ultimately, her humanity. She glanced at the framed photos on her desk, moments captured from various town events. The Meadowville food drive, the summer park renovation, the groundbreaking of a new community center. Each photograph represented a chapter of her dedication to the town, yet none of that had mattered to Officer Kirkland. To him, she was just another black woman who needed to be put in her place. As she stared at the photos, a knock at her office door jolted her back to reality. Her assistant, Carla, poked her head in, her face a mix of sympathy and barely contained frustration. "Mayor Walker," she said softly, her voice laden with concern, "I just wanted to check on you. It's been a crazy morning." Mary managed a tired smile, grateful for Carla's support. "Yes, that's putting it mildly. How's the town reacting?" Carla entered the office and closed the door behind her, lowering her voice. "The phones haven't stopped ringing since the videos went viral. Most people are outraged, Mayor. They're calling in support, asking how they can help. But we've also had a few, less supportive voices." Mary nodded, unsurprised. She had always known that her position as a black woman in power made her a target for certain people, and Meadowville wasn't immune to racial bias, no matter how much she had worked to make it a more inclusive place. Still, hearing about the voices of dissent stung. "What do they say?" she asked, bracing herself. Carla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Some are claiming you were resisting arrest, that you were acting above the law, as they put it. But the majority of the calls are supportive, outraged at how you were treated. There's a growing demand for an investigation into Kirkland's actions, and several local news outlets have already called, asking for statements." Mary sighed, feeling the weight of her next decision pressing down on her. "I have to address this, don't I?" Carla nodded firmly. "Yes, but on your terms. You have the right to tell the town your side of the story, and people need to hear it directly from you. They need to know who you are, not just the woman Kirkland humiliated in public." Mary felt a surge of gratitude for Carla's encouragement. "Thank you, Carla. I'll make a statement. But not yet. First, I need to consult with a few people. I want to handle this carefully." Carla nodded, understanding. "I'll keep the media at bay as long as I can." After Carla left, Mary sat in silence, her mind whirling. She had known Kirkland by reputation, a rigid, by-the-book officer who often seemed more interested in asserting control than fostering relationships. But his behavior today had crossed a line she couldn't ignore. She needed to reach out to key community leaders, to rally support from those who understood what she stood for and would stand beside her. Her first call was to Chief Larson, Meadowville's police chief. Chief Larson, a man in his late 50s with a stern but fair demeanor, had always supported Mary's initiatives for community police engagement. She knew he would be as shocked as she was about Kirkland's behavior. "Chief Larson," she began, her tone calm but assertive, "I need to speak with you about this morning's incident. I was treated with a level of disrespect and prejudice that I simply cannot ignore. Officer Kirkland's actions were not just an embarrassment to me, but a direct reflection on the values of your department. There was a long pause before Chief Larson spoke. Mary, I just got off the phone with Officer Daniels. He filled me in on the situation. And let me say this. I am appalled by what I heard. Officer Kirkland's behavior is under review, and we're launching an internal investigation. I want you to know that I won't tolerate any form of discrimination on my watch. Mary felt a small sense of relief. Thank you, Chief Larson. I trust that you'll handle this with transparency and integrity. But I need to make something clear. I won't be swept under the rug. The community deserves to know what happened, and we need to show them that we're holding our officers to the same standards of accountability. Understood, Mary, he replied, his voice steady. You have my full support in addressing this publicly. And please know, I'll be working closely with you every step of the way to ensure this doesn't happen again. After ending the call, Mary reached out to a few more trusted allies. Community leaders, activists, even the owner of the local newspaper, who had always supported her initiatives for a fairer, more inclusive Meadowville. Each call bolstered her resolve, and each conversation reminded her that she was not alone in this fight. By late afternoon, a small group had gathered outside the town hall. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds had come to show their support, holding signs that read "Justice for Mayor Walker" and "No more discrimination in Meadowville." Among them was Emma Brooks, a retired teacher and longtime resident who had watched Mary grow up and knew her character well. Emma approached Mary as she stepped outside, her eyes filled with fierce determination. "Mary, honey, I've known you since you were a little girl, and I know how hard you've worked to make this town better for everyone. What happened this morning was wrong, and we're here to support you however we can." Mary felt a swell of emotion as she hugged Emma. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks. It means so much to me that you're all here. This isn't just about me. It's about making sure everyone in Meadowville is treated with respect, no matter who they are." Emma nodded, her voice carrying the weight of years of wisdom and experience. "We're proud of you, Mary, and we won't let anyone tear down what you've built here." As the crowd grew, Mary saw familiar faces, teachers, business owners, young people she'd mentored over the years. Each person had come to show their support, their presence a reminder that her work had made an impact. This was a battle worth fighting. Steeling herself, Mary approached a small podium set up on the steps of Town Hall. She took a deep breath, scanning the faces in the crowd, feeling their energy, their belief in her. She adjusted the microphone and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," she started, her voice steady but filled with passion. "As many of you know, I was wrongfully detained this morning by a member of our police force. I was humiliated, disrespected, and treated as though I didn't belong in the very town I've worked so hard to serve." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd, but Mary continued, determined to keep the focus on justice. "This incident was not just about me," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "It was about every person who has ever been treated unfairly, everyone who has felt powerless against those in positions of authority. I am here to tell you today that we are not powerless. We have the right to demand accountability, to expect fairness, and to insist on dignity for every member of our community." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers ringing out as Mary's words ignited a spark. She felt the weight of her responsibility, not just as a mayor, but as a voice for those who had been marginalized and mistreated. "I have spoken with Chief Larson, and he has assured me that an investigation into Officer Kirkland's actions is underway. But this goes beyond one officer. We must work together to build a Meadowville where no one fears being targeted because of the color of their skin or the way they look. We need reform, we need accountability, and we need your voices to make it happen." As she spoke, Mary saw her words resonate with the crowd. People nodded, some raising their fists in solidarity. She knew that her community was ready to stand with her, to work alongside her to make Meadowville a place where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. When she finished her speech, the crowd roared, their voices lifted in unity and support. Mary stepped back from the podium, her heart racing. She was filled with both relief and a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about setting a new standard, about ensuring that no one in Meadowville felt marginalized or mistreated. As Mary made her way back inside, the crowd continued to chant her name, their cheers echoing down the streets. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a rallying cry for justice, and she knew that this was only the beginning. Meadowville was ready for change, and she was ready to lead, uniting the community. The days following Mary's powerful speech were a whirlwind. The town of Meadowville, once so quiet and predictable, had become a hub of conversation, action, and for some, confrontation. Mary's words had ignited something deep within the community, a long-buried desire for fairness, equality, and accountability. But with that energy also came resistance, as not everyone in Meadowville was ready to face the uncomfortable truth that bias and prejudice existed, even in their peaceful town. Inside her office, Mary reviewed the latest developments, her mind racing with the next steps. Chief Larson had followed through on his promise, launching a formal investigation into Officer Kirkland's actions. Kirkland had been placed on suspension, and rumors swirled that he was considering legal action against the town for what he claimed was unfair treatment. Mary was unsurprised. She knew that holding people accountable, especially those accustomed to wielding unchecked authority, often led to pushback. Carla entered the office with a folder in hand, her face serious. "Mayor Walker, the town council wants to meet with you. They're concerned about the unrest this is causing, especially among some of the more conservative voices in the community." Mary sighed, feeling the weight of the town's complex dynamics settle on her shoulders. Meadowville's council consisted of individuals with a wide range of perspectives, from progressive allies to those who viewed her recent actions as divisive. "Are they calling it unrest now?" Mary asked, arching an eyebrow. Carla nodded grimly. "Some of them are worried that the public protests are drawing too much negative attention. They're also concerned about the cost of the investigation, especially if Kirkland sues. You know how it is. They're always watching the budget." Mary pursed her lips, frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. She had expected some opposition, but hadn't anticipated that the council would be so focused on finances and appearances instead of the deeper issues at hand. But she had fought through resistance before, and she wouldn't let it deter her now. "Thank you, Carla," she said, closing the folder and rising from her desk. "I'll meet with them. But I'm not backing down from this. The people of Meadowville deserve transparency, justice, and a system they can trust." That evening, Mary attended the town council meeting. The room was packed with council members, community leaders, and concerned citizens who had come to witness the discussion. Many faces looked tense, some worried, others defiant. As Mary took her seat, the council members whispered among themselves, casting uncertain glances her way. Councilman Tom Bryant, a seasoned council member known for his cautious approach, opened the meeting. He cleared his throat, glancing down at the agenda before addressing Mary directly. "Mayor Walker," he began, his tone polite but pointed, "while we all agree that your experience was unfortunate, we're also concerned about the broader impact of these protests and the attention they're drawing to Meadowville. We need to keep in mind the reputation of our town and the potential financial risks associated with this investigation." Mary looked around the room, noting how carefully some council members avoided her gaze. But others met her eyes directly, their expressions filled with support. She knew she had allies here, even if they hadn't all spoken up yet. "Councilman Bryant," Mary replied, her voice steady, "this isn't just about my personal experience. It's about ensuring that every resident in Meadowville feels safe and respected. We cannot put a price tag on justice, nor should we be concerned with reputation over accountability. Our town's true reputation is built on how we treat each other, especially in moments like these." Councilwoman Rosa Martinez, one of Mary's staunch supporters, nodded in agreement. Mayor Walker is right. If we ignore this issue or brush it under the rug, we're sending a message to our community that some people's safety and dignity don't matter. That's not the town I want Meadowville to be. Tom shifted uncomfortably, looking around the room for support. Councilman Richard Young, who had always aligned with more conservative viewpoints, spoke up next. With all due respect, he said, his tone measured, I'm not sure this level of upheaval is necessary. We have a long-standing, mostly peaceful town here. Officer Kirkland's actions may have been unfortunate, but do we really want to blow this out of proportion? Mary felt her frustration deepen. It was clear that some members still viewed Kirkland's behavior as a minor misstep, rather than the egregious abuse of power it truly was. She took a steadying breath, choosing her words carefully. Councilman Young, this isn't about creating upheaval. It's about addressing a real problem that has been ignored for too long. If we turn a blind eye to this, we're not just condoning Officer Kirkland's actions. We're sending a message to every person in this town that their safety depends on the color of their skin, their social status, or how well they fit someone's idea of belonging. Is that really the kind of town we want to be? Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was a tense silence. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. Mayor Walker is absolutely right. Heads turned to see John Harris, a retired local teacher who had spent decades in Meadowville. Known for his calm demeanor and respect within the community, John was a trusted figure, and his support carried weight. I taught in this town for over 30 years, John continued, his voice steady and clear. I've seen kids grow up here, make their lives here. And let me tell you, turning a blind eye to injustice is the quickest way to poison a community. If we don't stand up for what's right, who will? A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and other townspeople began to nod. Mary felt a surge of gratitude and pride. She had known John since her school days, and hearing his support now was a reminder that her fight wasn't hers alone. Councilman Bryant, seeing the shift in the room, cleared his throat. Well, if there's consensus among the council and the community that we should move forward with this investigation, then I suppose we should support it. But I want to make it clear that we need to do this responsibly, with respect for all involved. Mary gave him a polite nod, knowing that responsibly was his way of trying to manage the process. But she didn't mind. She had gotten what she came for: official support to proceed with the investigation, a commitment from the council that they wouldn't back down under pressure. As the meeting adjourned, Mary found herself surrounded by people offering words of encouragement, shaking her hand, and voicing their support. Rosa Martinez leaned in, speaking quietly so only Mary could hear. "You're doing the right thing, Mary," she said with a warm smile. "And if you ever need anything, resources, allies, anything, I'm here for you." "Thank you, Rosa," Mary replied, touched by her friend's solidarity. The next morning, the energy in Meadowville was palpable. The town felt charged, alive with a sense of purpose as residents began discussing ways to support the investigation. Local businesses started displaying signs in their windows that read, "Justice for All," and "Stand with Mayor Walker," while small groups organized community meetings to discuss how to make Meadowville a fairer, more inclusive place. As Mary walked through town that afternoon, she couldn't help but feel both pride and a sense of responsibility. She knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. Not everyone in Meadowville supported her stance, and she had already heard whispers of opposition from certain circles, including a few vocal townsfolk who felt the situation was being overblown. But those voices were drowned out by the outpouring of support she encountered everywhere she went. At the local coffee shop, Janice, the barista, handed her a free coffee with a shy smile. "For everything you're doing, Mayor Walker, I'm proud to have you as our mayor." At the grocery store, an elderly man stopped her, his hand trembling as he reached out to shake hers. "I've been in this town a long time, and I've seen my share of good and bad. But I've never been prouder of this place than I am now. Thanks to you." Mary thanked each person, humbled by their encouragement, reminded of the strength and resilience of her community. That afternoon, Mary received a call from Chief Larson, who informed her that he had completed a preliminary review of Kirkland's history. Larson's voice was tense, his tone serious. "Mary, I think you'll want to see this in person. We've uncovered some things about Officer Kirkland's record that, well, let's just say they raise even more questions." Mary's pulse quickened. She had suspected that this wasn't Kirkland's first instance of misconduct, but hearing it confirmed brought a sense of validation to her efforts. She scheduled a meeting with Larson for the following day, determined to see the investigation through to the end. As she hung up the phone, Mary gazed out her office window, watching the town below. Meadowville was changing, and she knew it wasn't by accident. This was the result of years of hard work, of people standing together, and of a shared commitment to justice that would not be easily undone. In that moment, she understood the full magnitude of her role, not just as mayor, but as a catalyst for change. And she vowed to see it through, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. Uncovering the truth. The following day, Mary walked into the police station with a sense of purpose, her mind focused on what Chief Larson had hinted at in their phone conversation. The building buzzed with an unusual energy, officers glancing her way with curiosity, and in some cases, discomfort. Mary was keenly aware of the gravity of what she was about to uncover. If Officer Kirkland had a history of misconduct that had been ignored or downplayed, it would expose not only him, but the systemic issues within Meadowville's police department. Chief Larson greeted her at the door of his office, his expression a mix of tension and regret. He closed the door behind her, motioning for her to take a seat. On his desk lay a stack of personnel files, each one marked with dates and various annotations in red ink. "Thank you for coming in, Mary," Larson began, his voice weary. "What I'm about to show you isn't easy, and frankly, it's something I never expected to find. But the deeper I dug into Kirkland's history, the more disturbing details I uncovered." Mary nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. "I'm ready, Chief. The community deserves transparency, no matter how difficult it may be." He took a deep breath, opening the top file. "Officer Kirkland has been with our department for almost a decade. His early records looked clean on the surface. Commendations for good conduct, a few awards for community service. But then, about 5 years ago, complaints started coming in. Small things at first, things that could be written off as misunderstandings." He slid the file across the desk, and Mary scanned the pages, her brow furrowing as she read. One complaint mentioned Kirkland speaking harshly to a teenager of color during a routine traffic stop, with the young man describing his behavior as intimidating and unnecessarily aggressive. Another complaint was from a woman who said Kirkland had stopped her multiple times over a few weeks for minor traffic violations, all while making her feel uncomfortable with overly personal questions. "These complaints were brushed aside?" Mary asked, struggling to keep the frustration out of her voice. Larson nodded, regret clouding his expression. "Unfortunately, yes. At the time, it was chalked up to personality differences, minor misunderstandings. No one wanted to rock the boat. And honestly, our department has a history of sweeping these kinds of things under the rug. But looking at the pattern now, it's clear that there's something far more serious here." Mary continued to read, her heart sinking with each page. Over the years, the complaints against Kirkland had escalated. He had been reported for using excessive force during arrests, for intimidating people of color during routine stops, and for disregarding established procedures. Each time, the reports had been marked as unsubstantiated or resolved informally. No formal disciplinary action had ever been taken. Her fingers tightened around the file. How was this allowed to continue? "Chief, how did no one notice this pattern?" Larson sighed, running a hand over his face. "I wish I had a good answer, Mary. The truth is, our department has never been forced to confront these issues. Meadowville isn't a big city with a diverse population. There's an underlying culture here that prioritizes maintaining the status quo over enforcing real accountability. And Kirkland, well, he's taken advantage of that. Mary's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. If Kirkland's behavior had been ignored for years, how many others had suffered in silence? How many other residents had been made to feel small, humiliated, or threatened simply because no one had the courage to call out the injustice? She closed the file, looking directly at Larson. "Chief, we have to do something about this. It's not enough to suspend Kirkland or issue an apology. We need real, lasting changes. I can't, in good conscience, stand by and let this be another incident that gets brushed under the rug." Larson nodded, the weight of his agreement evident in his eyes. "I agree, Mary. And I think it's time we look at broader reforms within the department. We need to address not just Kirkland's behavior, but the system that allowed it to go unchecked." Mary's thoughts churned, already formulating a plan. "I want to establish an independent review board, a committee made up of community members, people who can investigate complaints and provide accountability outside of the department. We need a fresh perspective, one that isn't influenced by internal politics." Larson hesitated, clearly weighing the implications. An independent board would be unprecedented in a town like Meadowville. But given what's come to light, it may be exactly what we need. I'll support it, though I suspect it'll meet with resistance from some within the department. Mary met his gaze, her voice firm. "Then we'll face that resistance together. We're here to serve and protect everyone in Meadowville, not just a select few. We can't keep pretending there's no problem when the evidence is right in front of us." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, drafting an outline for the review board, and brainstorming potential candidates from the community who would bring integrity and fairness to the role. Larson also agreed to release a public statement acknowledging Kirkland's suspension and committing to a transparent investigation, a significant step for a department that had traditionally operated behind closed doors. By the time Mary left the station, word had already spread about Kirkland's suspension, and speculation was running wild. Some residents were furious, demanding to know why he hadn't been removed sooner. Others defended him, unable or unwilling to believe that their good cop could be capable of misconduct. The tension in the air was palpable, as if Meadowville itself was standing on the edge of a revelation it wasn't ready to face. Mary spent the rest of the day visiting community centers, local businesses, and gathering spaces, speaking directly with residents. She listened to their concerns, reassured them of her commitment to transparency, and explained the plans for an independent review board. While many supported her, she also encountered resistance. At a local cafe, an older man named Frank approached her. He was a retired factory worker, someone she had seen around town many times before. His expression was tight with frustration. "Mayor Walker," he said, his voice low but tense, "I don't understand why you're stirring all this up. Meadowville has always been a good town, a safe town. Sure, there might be a few misunderstandings, but calling it discrimination is going too far. You're creating division where there doesn't need to be any." Mary listened patiently, understanding that Frank's perspective came from a place of familiarity. For him, Meadowville was a comfortable place where he had lived his whole life without facing prejudice or discrimination. But she knew that his experience was only one part of the story. "Frank," she replied gently, "I understand why this feels unsettling. But safety and fairness should apply to everyone, not just some. If you've always felt safe here, I'm glad. But there are people in Meadowville who don't feel the same way, who worry every time they see a police car or feel afraid to speak up when something's wrong. We can't ignore their experiences, even if they don't align with ours." Frank shifted uncomfortably, as if grappling with a truth he'd rather not face. It's hard to believe things are really that bad." Mary placed a hand on his arm, hoping to bridge the gap. "I'm not asking you to believe it because of what I say. I'm asking you to listen to the people who've been affected, to hear their stories, and to understand that Meadowville can be even better, fairer and safer for everyone." Frank looked down, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He gave her a small nod. "I'll think about it, Mayor. I'll listen." That evening, Mary met with other leaders in the community, including Pastor Isaiah Johnson, who led one of the town's oldest churches and had long been a voice for social justice in Meadowville. His church was a haven for the town's minority communities, a place where people could speak openly and find support. Mary, Pastor Johnson greeted her warmly, embracing her like family. "I saw the news about Kirkland. The community is hurting, but they're also hopeful. People feel seen, finally, and they're grateful to you for that." Mary smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for his unwavering support. "Thank you, Pastor. But there's still so much work to do. I need your help, especially with the review board. I want people on it who are truly committed to justice and fairness, who understand the needs of this town." Pastor Johnson nodded thoughtfully. "I know just the people. We have community members who are ready to stand up, people who felt overlooked for too long. We're with you, Mary, all the way." The two discussed strategies, from organizing town hall meetings to ensure every voice could be heard, to educational initiatives aimed at fostering better understanding and empathy. Mary knew that building trust would take time, but with allies like Pastor Johnson and Chief Larson, she felt hopeful that real change was within reach. As she returned home that night, exhaustion began to settle over her, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with a sense of purpose. She knew there were people who still opposed her, who clung to the comfort of denial rather than face the truth of inequality in their town. But she also knew there were many more who stood beside her, people who were ready to fight for a Meadowville that represented everyone. Lying in bed, Mary reflected on the day, her heart breaking the silence. Over the next week, Mary found herself at the center of a town-wide reckoning. As word spread about the investigation into Officer Kirkland and the proposed independent review board, Meadowville's residents were divided. Some saw the changes as necessary, a long overdue step toward equality and accountability. Others viewed them with skepticism, clinging to the belief that Meadowville's past didn't need fixing. One afternoon, Mary held a community town hall in the local high school gymnasium, a space large enough to accommodate the number of people who had shown up. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the room, and the bleachers were filled with townsfolk who'd come to voice their opinions, support, or concerns. The atmosphere was tense. Conversations buzzed in low murmurs, people exchanging worried glances or nods of solidarity. Mary stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd. The diversity of faces, young, old, of different races and backgrounds, reminded her of the reason she'd stepped into this role in the first place. She wanted a Meadowville where everyone felt they belonged, where no one feared being treated differently based on the color of their skin, where her own daughter, growing up in this town, would never feel anything less than valued and respected. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm but clear, carrying across the large room. "Thank you for being here tonight. I know this isn't an easy time for our town, and I know that many of you have questions, concerns, or even doubts about what's been happening recently. I want you to know that I'm here to listen, and I'm here to tell you the truth about what we've uncovered." A hush fell over the room, all eyes on Mary. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Over the past few weeks, we've launched an investigation into Officer Kirkland's conduct, and I want to be fully transparent with you about what we've found so far. There is a documented history of complaints against him, many of which were dismissed or handled without proper scrutiny. These complaints came from people who felt uncomfortable, threatened, and, in some cases, harassed. For too long, these voices were ignored. The crowd murmured, the weight of her words settling over them. Mary noticed Frank, the older man she'd spoken to at the cafe, sitting near the front, his expression a mix of uncertainty and concern. "We are not here to paint every officer in Meadowville as guilty or untrustworthy," Mary continued. "But we have a responsibility to hold those who abuse their power accountable. I believe that as a community, we deserve a police force that serves all of us equally. That's why we're forming an independent review board, a committee made up of our very own residents who will oversee complaints, review officer conduct, and ensure that no one, regardless of their race, background, or status, is treated unfairly. A hand shot up in the back of the room, and Mary nodded to a woman standing near the bleachers. "Mayor Walker," the woman said, her voice both anxious and respectful, "I think what you're doing is important, but I worry that this investigation could damage the reputation of our police department. Don't you think it might make people lose trust in our officers?" Mary met the woman's gaze, feeling the honesty behind her question. "That's a valid concern," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "But I believe the opposite is true. Accountability builds trust. When people know that their complaints will be taken seriously, they are more likely to trust the system. This isn't about tearing down our police department. It's about making it stronger, fairer, and ensuring it truly represents the values of Meadowville." Another hand went up, this time belonging to a young black man seated with his family. "Mayor Walker," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've lived here all my life, and I've seen firsthand what happens when people of color get pulled over, even for minor things. We're often treated as suspects first, and people second. How will this new review board make sure that changes?" Mary felt a surge of determination as she responded. "The review board will be made up of community members, people like you who understand the realities of Meadowville. Their role will be to ensure that any complaints of discrimination or misconduct are thoroughly investigated. It's a way of giving power back to the people, of making sure that everyone has a voice, and that no one is silenced." The young man nodded, a hint of hope in his eyes. Mary could feel the tide shifting, could see the small but important impact her words were having on those in the crowd who had long felt unheard. But not everyone was convinced. A man stood up abruptly from the side of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his expression hard. "This is all well and good, Mayor," he said, his tone laced with skepticism, "but aren't you just stirring up trouble where there isn't any? I've never had a problem with our police force, and I don't see why we need to go through all this just because a few people got their feelings hurt." Murmurs of agreement rose from a small cluster around him, and Mary recognized some of the more conservative voices in the town. She took a deep breath, determined to address the question without fueling the tension further. "I understand where you're coming from," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm glad that your experience has been a positive one. But I ask you to consider this. Just because something hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it hasn't happened to others. We all want the same things: a safe community, a police force we can trust, and the right to be treated with dignity. This isn't about punishing anyone or stirring up trouble. It's about making sure everyone in Meadowville feels protected and respected." The man muttered something under his breath, but he sat down, his expression less combative. Mary continued to scan the room, feeling the weight of each person's gaze, sensing the blend of hope, fear, and resistance that filled the space. She knew that change was hard, and that even those who supported her would face challenges, but she also knew that their resolve would be tested. After the town hall, Mary lingered to speak with residents one-on-one, answering questions and listening to their stories. As she made her way through the crowd, Frank approached her, looking thoughtful. "Mayor Walker," he said slowly, "I've been thinking about what you said, about seeing things from another perspective. I realized I've never really considered what it must be like for someone else in this town, someone who doesn't look like me. Maybe I didn't want to see it because it made me uncomfortable." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression gentle. "It takes courage to recognize that, Frank, and the fact that you're willing to try. That's what makes Meadowville strong. We don't have to agree on everything, but if we're open to understanding each other, that's where real change begins." Frank nodded, his face softening. "Thank you, Mary. I just want what's best for this town." "So do I," Mary replied, her voice filled with conviction. "And I truly believe that's what we're working toward." Over the next few days, Mary's vision for the Independent Review Board began to take shape. With the help of Pastor Johnson and other community leaders, she identified a diverse group of candidates who were respected, fair-minded, and deeply invested in Meadowville's welfare. Each candidate brought a unique perspective, from retired teachers and business owners to young professionals and community organizers. The board would represent a true cross-section of the town, embodying the values of equity and justice that Mary had long fought for. Meanwhile, tensions continued to rise among a small but vocal segment of Meadowville's population. Anonymous flyers were distributed, accusing Mary of sowing division and tearing apart the fabric of the town. Some even called for her resignation, claiming that her actions had gone too far. It hurt Mary to see the backlash, but she refused to let it weaken her resolve. In a show of solidarity, several local businesses rallied behind her, posting signs in their windows that read, "We stand with Mayor Walker and justice for all." Community members, including those who had once been silent on issues of race and inequality, spoke out on social media and in public forums, sharing stories of their own experiences with bias and discrimination. The voices that had once been silenced were now speaking louder than ever, refusing to be dismissed or ignored. One evening, as Mary was reviewing the final list of candidates for the review board, Carla entered her office with a hesitant look on her face. "Mayor Walker, there's someone here to see you," Carla said, her tone uncertain. "It's Officer Daniels."